and welcome to Are We There Yet? MarketScale's online video podcast series that explores the most exciting companies and projects in transportation today. My name is Grant Harrell, and as your host, I'll speak with the voices of today's most exciting companies, learning truly what's at the cutting edge of transportation technology today. And today, I don't think there's any better and more relevant topic that we could discuss. There's so much happening right now within power and energy and smart mobility. And so really excited today to speak with a leader within the field, Itron. Itron enables utilities and cities to better manage energy and water through Itron's proven portfolio of smart networks, software, services, meters, and sensors. The company truly helps customers to better manage energy and water for the people that they serve. And to speak with us today about Itron, we have Mark Braby, the head of e-mobility and data for Itron. Mark is a seasoned leader with experience extending hyper-growth companies and disruptive industries, and he's doing just that with Itron. He's very much focused on building the grid edge platform of the future, focused on energy decentralization and electric mobility. So, Mark, thank you so much for your time today, and welcome to Are We There Yet?
Thank you, Grant. Very glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We're really excited to get to speak with you today. And as I shared, just such a relevant topic that we're discussing today, power, energy distribution, some of the evolution of transportation and e-mobility. And there's just so much happening right now. So really appreciate you taking the time to talk. And so would love to just, jump right into it. And what we're seeing right now is you well know and are involved in just a major integration right now of EV charging, renewable energy infrastructure into the grid and the future strain that we know this is going to have. And what I'd really like to understand is if utility companies are really prepared for this. And so fitting within the theme of the podcast series, are we there yet?
Yeah, well, I'd say it's a work in progress, of course. Certainly, there are utilities that have been working with solar and EV charging for some time, particularly on the coast. So in California and other areas where they've already started to see the proliferation. And so, yeah, I think when we look across our spectrum of utility partners, there's some that are recognizing the challenges that this will bring, but also recognizing the opportunity. And so, it's an opportunity to work with their end customers, educate their end customers, and really, when you think about EV charging, it's the biggest opportunity for load that utilities will ever see in this lifetime, ever since basically the advent of air conditioning and how that impacted loads back in kind of the 50s and 60s. This is a massive opportunity for them as well. So yeah, I think the focus is there. I think when we start to think about some of the challenges it'll cause, I think certainly some utilities are thinking about it, but there's also some that have a ways to go there. So that's part of what Itron can bring to the table is helping utilities provide that visibility, even detecting where some of these things are at on the grid. That's part of the role we can play.
Very much, very much. Well, I love that you're focused on the positive and the opportunity, and great to hear that utility companies that you're working with already are getting there in terms of preparation, and the others that aren't I know will certainly benefit from support from Itron. I understand that you're such a leader within this space, and that you really serve as the market leader in terms of meters deployed. Could you tell us a little bit more about your involvement in this sector and really how your company Itron is well positioned to assist utilities in planning for this future that we're talking about?
Yeah. So when you think of meters, the first thing you think of is, all right, that's kind of how my bill comes to me, right? Somebody's tracking something so they can bill me. But how we think of it is well beyond that. I mean, these are sensors that are deployed at a very important part of the grid, which is the grid edge. It's that interface between what's happening on the grid side of things and what's happening on the customer side of things. And so the fact that we can get data off of these are networked assets, right? We can get data, we can get real-time data, and then we can run analytics off of that. We can do optimization algorithms. And with our new technology, we actually have compute power in that endpoint. So we can run applications both locally on the meter or endpoint, and then also connect those to the cloud, so we can leverage the compute power of the cloud and all that brings to bear, as well as local compute power, local capability for speed, resiliency, those aspects. So yeah, it's not just a meter. It's a grid edge computer essentially. So yeah, we're really excited about that. Again, I've spent a lot of time in solar storage, home energy management, EV charging. And I always thought, when these things get to scale, what type of company is really going to be able to make a huge difference in taking us to the next level? And Itron's that company, just because of the footprint, the DNA in terms of managing a massive network. If you think about the amount of solar that's out there now, and EV charging, it's at the scale of starting to get to, it's millions, right? But Itron is managing a network of 80 million endpoints at this juncture. And so that's where we want to take it. So, really that DNA to be able to do that, manage that network, manage the data coming off of it, do it in a resilient fashion, as well as putting some of the intelligence on top of it. We think is the key to the future, and really being able to help our customers.
Yeah. Yeah. So speaking to that, talking about the future, and I think you've kind of hinted to this a little bit, but when you start to talk about this strain of continued EV charging and renewable energy infrastructure integration, and kind of that strain until we really get to where we need to be, through the establishment of that infrastructure and technology that I know you and Itron are working hard on. Can you tell us a little bit more, I guess kind of what this strain looks like maybe, and why it's so important to set up this infrastructure for kind of this next evolution within power?
Yeah, well, I mentioned kind of one of the corollaries is what happened with air conditioning, back in the 50s and 60s, and a lot of those were wall units at the time. So everybody would come home, kids would come home or from school, or adults would come home from work, and they'd flip on the wall unit, and it would just cause brownouts, right? Everything, load happening at once would cause brownouts. Now, eventually that was managed through intelligent thermostats, right? But you can think of EV charging as a similar use case, right? So most of charging will happen at work or at home. So if we take the home use case, come home, plug in your car, same type of thing, right? Unless there's either a price signal or some intelligence to be able to shift the behavior, or intelligently just shift the charging. And so I think that's a kind of a simple example. If you think about bigger fleet depots per se, that's a different issue, right? So similar in the fashion that, maybe take school buses, right? They all come back to a depot all at one time, plug in, and they sit there for 14 hours for the most part. They all don't need to be charging at the same time, but it's a different scale of load. We're talking, with a residential charger, it's typically less than 11 kilowatts. When we talk about fleet charging, it's in the megawatt scale, right? So again, a lot of utilities will say, well, we have capacity for days, so we think we can handle this, just because we plan for big peaks. But anytime you're plopping a big depot down, particularly in an urban area at the megawatt scale, there needs to be upgrades, right? And those upgrades cost money. Somebody has to bear the cost of that. It's going to be the ratepayer at the end of the day. But at the same time, that needs to be intelligently planned out, right? It needs to be intelligently planned out for what that initial depot looks like, and then what happens when there's another depot down the street, right? And then what happens when that school district starts out with 20 vehicles and then moves to 100 to 200, right? Like, that takes a lot of planning, and so I think that's where we're at right now, is starting to think through that.
Sure, sure. No, that makes a lot of sense. Absolutely. I appreciate the analogy. And in Texas, we can certainly relate to that. I think we've had quite the stretch of 100 degrees plus here. And so we're all doing everything that we can to kind of conserve industry as best as possible. So I think that's a great analogy, especially here in Texas. So we have kind of an idea, through your insights in terms of kind of what's happening now, what future conditions, are going to look like, what the problems could be. And I think that this really highlights the importance of your work with Itron and the great work that you're doing today, to set up with this infrastructure. How do the utility companies themselves, best plan for this future? I imagine that there is a fine line between kind of too much infrastructure and just the right amount. And so, figuring out exactly how much is necessary, over the next couple of years and long term, I'd love to understand a little bit more about, how these utility companies and working with you and Itron, really plan for these future conditions that we know are ahead.
Yeah, in a number of ways. I mean, from a residential perspective, the first thing we're doing with a lot of our utility partners is just detecting where the assets are. Just because if you think about somebody goes out, if I go out and buy an EV, I can have an EV charger installed, and the utility may not even know about it. So we're just trying to, first of all, have the utility wrap their hands around that problem, detecting where the chargers are at. I guess the second thing is the planning part, right? Like thinking about, okay, this is what we have now. This is what it's going to look like in 3 years, 5 years, 10 years. This is how we should think about upgrading. And then I think the other part of it is just providing real-time visibility. And so, traditionally utilities have visibility into their medium voltage assets, right? Through kind of traditional ADMS, Advanced Demand Management system, or traditional DERMS, Distributed Energy Resource Management System. But where they lack visibility is in that low voltage part of the grid, kind of from the substation to the meter. So that's part of what we're helping with them with is have the visibility into that section and how section of the grid, and then how DRs are impacting distributed energy resources are impacting that part of the grid. So how solar is backfeeding to the grid is impacting it, how EV charging is going to impact it, and then providing that real-time data that allows them to track this in real time, and also eventually provide the control and optimization. And so I think when an end customer, like a commercial customer, is like, oh, I'm not going to allow a utility to control my assets, you may, if they're incentivizing you in the right way, right? If they're paying you something to control it. So it could be something quite lucrative. So everybody talks about vehicle to grid, which is, pushing energy back to the grid from a vehicular battery. But there's also V1G, which is basically curtailment around this. So I think the whole thing is our hypothesis is that there has to be this interplay between an orchestration between low voltage grid and end customer assets. It's going to be bidirectional. It's going to be real time. It's going to be driven by price signals, and that's what we're setting up, our technology for.
Yeah, yeah. So when you talk about kind of that collaboration between all of the parties involved and certainly significant costs with, establishing this infrastructure integration and enhancement, who really bears the cost? And I would imagine it's portions coming from different parties, different organizations. But I'd love to kind of dive into that a little bit and kind of understand who the responsibility really kind of trickles down to, and who bears the cost of establishing this infrastructure that's so needed.
Yeah, I mean, you can think about it a couple of ways, right? I mean, it's the ratepayer at the end of the day. I mean, the utility business model is legacy business model, put steel in the ground, charge it back to the ratepayer through a rate base, right? And so the more steel we're putting in the ground, the more upgrades, the more that rate base is going to see that cost. And so the other aspect of it is big commercial projects. If again, going back to that, take school bus depot, right? Maybe a 5 megawatt depot you need to put in. If the utility says, we've done a study, we need transformer upgrades, we may even need a substation upgrade, school district, you're going to have to share in this cost, right? Like we'll split it with you and then charge our rate base part of that. But actually, under our current guidelines, we can't even spread that whole cost to the rate base. We want you to share in it. So the risk is two things, right? For that school district project, the school district doesn't have enough money either, so it makes the project untenable. The vehicles don't electrify. Or ratepayers start to scream because the rates go up so much, right? We're already getting squeezed with inflation. We don't need really high utility bills either at this juncture. So I think that's the key. Is we're trying to approach the upgrades that are needed in an intelligent fashion, and I think that involves smart planning, but it also involves real-time visibility and then potentially control to mitigate issues. And so that's where we think Itron and the platform we're developing can really mitigate the costs to the ratepayer as well as to project developers and project customers that are having to pay and upgrade grid assets.
Yeah. Okay. No, that makes a lot of sense. And I was curious too, and I think you've done such a great job, at explaining this, and but I'd love to, understand even a little bit more, kind of, but at a very high level, who are really the communities, the companies, organizations, industries that are kind of all working together now, or need to collaborate, even more in the future to really kind of prepare, for this future of energy distribution that we're talking about. Would love to, understand even at a very high level, kind of who all of those parties are that are, really working together to make all this happen.
Yeah, it's a wide swath of folks that probably haven't worked together in the past, but so start with the auto manufacturers, right? And their auto manufacturers in the future are going to look more like energy providers with transportation electrification. So they need to be working with utilities, right? As well as end customers purchasing the vehicles. And so let's take the fleet example again. What we've seen a lot of times is the utilities aren't really talking with the end customers until a load study's needed. So what we're trying to do is bring stakeholders together early on in the equation such that there's not delays with projects. And again, there's there's efficiencies in terms of keeping costs at a reasonable level. I also think it's super critical that technology providers play a key role in this. So again, if we think about the visibility we need to provide and then the control and optimization, we need standard interfaces to these assets. And so that comes through standardization of protocols out there. So it's pretty much the Wild West in terms of protocols at this juncture between DERs, whether that's solar storage, as well as charging assets. And so we really need standard protocols to be able to connect to these assets, provide visibility and optimization. So that's not the sexiest thing. I was at a show, or I was with an industry group a few weeks ago, and we had like a contest amongst a bunch of tables as to like, what do you think is the most critical thing that the industry can solve right now? And I said, oh, it's got to be protocols. And I went down this whole line of thinking, and I didn't win, of course, but some guy afterwards, he's like, once you started, I thought you were going to talk about AI and ML, but you started talking about protocols, and I just got bored. So,
Yeah.
But it's so important, right? I mean,
Yeah, it is.
Just take the Tesla supercharger example, right? They have their own connector at this juncture, right? And so if I want to charge a different vehicle, I have to have an adapter. Or if I want to charge my Tesla, I have on a charge point station, for instance, I have to have an adapter in my vehicle. Like that's just one simple example, but that's a pain, right? So standard interfaces, standard protocols, and I think that's going to be difficult, right? Because you're talking about auto manufacturers. They can't decide on a protocol amongst their own industry, working with utilities who, have very strong opinions as well. So I think we got a lot of work to do, but I'm optimistic we can get there if we can get everybody rowing in the same direction.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, at one point they all agreed on a standard gas cap, right? So I mean, they ought to be able to collaborate, on this as well. And I agree that makes a lot of sense, with the protocols and just how important that's going to be. So that makes a lot of sense for sure. I think you've done such a great job. I think of really kind of describing these conditions at a very high level. Who are the parties involved? What really is important and needs to take place, in the coming years as we get ready for this next chapter within energy and power distribution. And it's a really exciting time. It's all positive. I think we're moving in a great direction, and just a necessary component right now to kind of get ready, for this next evolution that we know is coming. So I think all very positive, and I think you've done just a great job and insights that I know our audience members are really going to benefit from in terms of just really understanding kind of what's happening right now. I can only imagine as well that as a result of today's interview, there's going to be a lot of organizations out there, audience members that are going to be really excited, about exploring opportunities to collaborate with you and your team and with Itron as you continue to work on this very important work. Do you mind sharing with audience members how they can best, learn a little bit more about Itron and maybe reach out to explore opportunities to collaborate with the company?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, visiting our website, very clearly, itron.com, exploring some of our optimization products that we're bringing to market. So EV charging optimizer is one of them. Grid optimizer is another one. DER optimizer is another one. So can research all of those. And then just you can reach out to me and my team directly. We're always looking for more industry collaboration. I think Itron, we view ourselves as an open network, always have. And so, very interested in collaboration and new partners all the time.
Awesome. Well, that's great to hear. Well, Mark, thank you so much. Again, I really just appreciate your insights, and I think you do just such a wonderful job of jumping into the technical details and the issues, and really, what's happening, but at the same time, explaining things in such a way that someone outside of the industry like myself can really understand it and get a kind of a clear idea of what's going on. So, just really appreciate your time and your insights today, and want to wish you and your team and Itron best of luck in the future. And just thank you so much for taking the time to stop by today and share some of your insights. Really appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Grant. Really appreciate you hosting and all those great questions. So appreciate it.
Absolutely. Well, thank you. So much, Mark. We'll take care and best of luck.